Welcome to the Wired for Success podcast, your show for ambitious, mission-driven entrepreneurs who understand that there's more to entrepreneurship than finding the latest flash-in-the-pan strategies, who understand that in order to build your empire, you need a solid foundation. I wholeheartedly believe that entrepreneurship is the biggest self-development journey you can be on, and it's my mission to help you make that journey easier. In this show, I bring together the very best from science, self-development, and entrepreneurship to set you up for sustainable success. Hi, I'm Claudia Garbutt, the scientist and mindset coach behind this show, and you're listening to the Wired for Success podcast. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Wired for Success podcast, where we talk about all things science, self-development, and entrepreneurship that help you get to that next level of success in your life and business. And today I'm super excited to talk to Dr. Gregory Kelly. He is a naturopathic physician. He's director of product development at Neurohacker Collective, and he's the author of the book Shapeshift. I invited Dr. Kelly because we are both very interested in high performance and helping others become the best version of themselves so that they can achieve everything they want to achieve in their life. And I think we can all learn a lot from Dr. Kelly's work. So welcome, Gregory, and thank you so much for being on my show today.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be on it. Thank you for having me.
So I would love to know a little bit more about your background. So what was it that motivated you to focus or to put your focus on all the things that allow us humans to perform at a higher level?
So I'm gonna, I'll make this as short and cut to the chase. But basically, I went to college, came out with an engineering degree, and this was in the mid '80s. And the U.S. Navy paid for my education. So I went in and served 5+ years as an officer in the U.S. Navy. And early on, I was super fortunate that one of the buddies I had was what we would think of almost as a bodybuilder now, like not maybe quite that extreme, but really into training with weights. And I was this super skinny, I'd been a runner in high school and played a little bit of hockey, but wasn't particularly good in either. And he dragged me to the gym. So between his efforts to get me to be more physically fit, and then me realizing that in my whole life I just eaten what someone had put in front of me and didn't know anything about nutrition, I decided at that point to start reading more about education and health. And so even in that time period in the Navy, in my early 20s, I was the fit and healthy officer, like the neurotic eater, basically, like that would bring his own food onto the ship. And then when I got out of the Navy, I really wanted to travel. And it occurred to me that to be able to do that, especially places I wanted to go, like Southeast Asia, as an example, that I ideally should be better able to do self-care in case I did get sick. So I started studying herbs and acupuncture and a lot of things now that we would dump in with naturopathic or alternative medicine. And in that kind of like that post-Navy time period, I stumbled upon naturopathic medicine, and they had encompassed a lot of that. So when I went into naturopathic medicine, I really went in from the position of I haven't been sick. I think most people that were, at least my classmates, were drawn to naturopathic medicine at that point had been sick with something, conventional medicine hadn't been able to help them, and someone that practiced some variant of natural medicine or alternative medicine had. I went in the opposite. I just was eager to learn more about things that would take someone that was healthy and make them even more healthy. So I think personally, I've always been driven more by a question of what does health look like? And then is there a shorter path to get there? So I'm sure you would know of the term neuro-linguistic programming, NLP.
Yeah.
So it's a loaded term. But one of the things I liked about the origins of NLP is the founders essentially had this idea that, there's these super successful people, and let's study some of them. And they studied Gregory Bateson and Virginia Satir and Milton Erickson, the people that basically did very different types of therapy. And their idea was that a lot of what they were doing to produce these great results was likely unnecessary. It was fluff. And if we study them, maybe we could figure out what's the fluff and what's the really important cut to the chase that's going to make a big difference. So when I think of NLP, I think of that. It doesn't really matter to me what you apply that to, but a lot of times people that are getting great results, they'll be doing a lot of things, but they're often in the least good position to understand which of those are producing the results and which are the fluff. Right? So like I was fortunate that I kind of intersected with NLP in that same post-Navy beginning of my naturopathic trajectory in the early 90s. And so to me, that's always, again, been a driving thing. Like what's really makes the difference here? And most things, as I'm sure you know and your audience knows, tend to follow that 80-20 rule, or sometimes even more exaggerated, like 95-5, where most of what is going to get you 95% of the way there is relatively a small amount of what you're being told to do. Exactly.
I love that. And I like to use NLP in my coaching as well. I think that sometimes, I always find that really it depends on the personality of the people. So I use two approaches, or mainly two approaches. One is the CBT approach, where it's more cognitive behavioral therapy, and NLP. And I find that some people just the way they are wired, or the way their personality works, they respond better to one approach as compared to the other one. But it's really nice if you can just take what works and you combine it with something else. You don't have to follow one strict line. You just mix and match and see what works for that person. So I like to combine those.
Yeah, I think of them as just parts of a toolkit. Ideally, the more tools you have, the more appropriate one you'll find for whatever the job is that you're likely to do. So I know, I think this was also a construct in NLP. It's basically the idea of adding more optionality in. Right? You want more options. You give more options to an intelligent system. In general, it's going to outperform one with less options. Right. And then what I've seen though on the flip side of that is, so I remember this was around like the 9/11 time period, that early 2000s, and I was consulting for a startup company that was doing an intersection of health and software. And one of the MDs was like, he would have said integrative medicine medical doctor. And what that meant to him was basically doing a whole bunch of stuff to everyone. So like he would take all the tools and apply them all the time. Okay. And I was just like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like in my practice, no one needs all the tools all at once. They'll usually need me to pick one or two that are the most important, and so sometimes that would have been NLP, sometimes that was nutrition, sometimes it was diet. And so, I just thought at the time that it was funny, like he and I both would have had a similar toolkit, but how we applied them was vastly different.
Yeah, that goes back to this 80-20 rule, where you just pick the 20% of things that give you the best results, and you forget about the rest because they only produce overwhelm, and it's just too much and you don't need it. Yep.
So, I remember there was a point in naturopathic school where I taught and practiced yoga most days. I did Tai Chi, sometimes in breaks between classes. I was never good at it, but I messed around with the guitar and ukulele. I meditated. So I was doing all these good things. And I remember one morning waking up and just thinking about all these things I had to do, like the good things, never mind like actually being in school for 8 hours and doing a part-time job. And I had trouble getting out of bed. It was just like a meltdown, like where I was like, that I was so busy with these good things. And at the time I just decided, well, the good things are supposed to serve me, not me serve them. And so too much good, I believe, can be no good, right? Like we don't want to get to that place of overwhelm.
Exactly. So let's talk about brain performance in general. Can you tell us a little bit about what keeps the brain happy and working optimally?
So I think that in the most simple sense, I think of the brain as having two main jobs. It's safety being one of them, right? Like the brain's main thing is default to keeping us safe. So even if we're asleep, the brain's really, really active, especially our hearing. So, and sensory input requires a lot of energy. So ultimately, to me, the most driving or most limiting thing in the brain would fall under this construct of mental energy. So the brain, I mean, estimates are that the brain uses about 20 to 25% of the fuel that our whole body burns every day, and that, you know, it can be as active every second as a muscle in our leg would be running a marathon. So, I mean, that to me, the energy piece is the core limiting factor. And one of the things that definitely happens as people age or get less healthy is their ability to turn fuel into energy in the brain diminishes. And so I just think I ultimately almost always come back to energy. So,
yeah.
And then I think different brains are good and bad at different things. So I have, we'll talk more about some of the things the brain does, but I used to believe that more was just more, right? So like I would say like an above average memory, at least academically, you know, from taking tests and retaining information. And I always thought like having a photographic memory, like even a better memory would be better. And I wish I could remember the book I saw this in, but it was back in around the early 2000s. There was a chapter about this person that at the time when they wrote the book had the documented best memory. And one of the things that really stood out to me when I read this chapter was there was a whole bunch of things that you and I would take for granted that he couldn't do because it takes a little bit of forgetting that his brain wouldn't allow, right? So it finally dawned on me that more isn't better. More meant like it was more of a zero-sum game. More in this area meant less in another area. So when I think of like the brains, I think that many of us have, for lack of a better way to describe it, different software versions installed. Some people get way more of the empathy and social cognition. Others get way more of executive functions. Some people get a much more balance, right? And then with whatever software you have, the amount of energy that your brain's able to put into those will dictate how well it runs. And then I think lots of things compete for that energy. So what we end up seeing is that the way the brains work for different people is vastly different. And the way they may respond to the same thing that you give them, a supplement or a nootropic, can be really different depending on what their brain's optimized to do, right, and where it's struggling.
So there's really just not one size fits all because we're all unique. And that's it, right? So I would love to talk a little bit more about what makes entrepreneurship a challenge from a neuroscience point of view, because the way I see it, and as you said before, our brain is wired to seek safety and to avoid danger and uncertainty. And that's why our brain loves the familiar and why leaving one's comfort zone is so hard and, well, uncomfortable. Now, when we stray too far from our comfort zone and we don't know how to adapt, then we often end up in this constant survival mode that affects both our mental as well as our physical health. And I see that happen to a lot of entrepreneurs. And that's why I think it's so important to talk about that issue and raise awareness around it. Because according to some numbers that I found, about 72% of entrepreneurs are directly or indirectly affected by mental health issues, compared to just 48% of non-entrepreneurs. And that is quite a big difference, right? So I would say finding effective ways to manage stress on different levels. So in entrepreneurship, there are probably emotional stress and mental stress, so different levels of stress. So it's super important to find ways to manage different levels of stress. So what are your recommendations when it comes to stress management strategies?
I think before we jump into that, I think this would be relevant for what, like a relevant metaphor for what's going on with the entrepreneurs. But I'm a huge fan of a podcast in the US called Hidden Brain. It's put on by NPR. It's really well produced. And a couple of years back, they had an episode that was on what bandwidth would have been in the title. But the general idea is that think of like again, like maybe it has to do with that mental energy idea, but we've got like so much bandwidth for our brain to be thinking, for lack of a better way to describe it. And that certain things will consume a huge amount of that bandwidth. So if, like an example, there's been lots of studies into long-term calorie deprivation, typically in the context of people trying to lose weight. But you have TV shows like Survivor or The Biggest Loser. You have old experiments from the World War II era, like the Minnesota starvation experiment, where they had volunteers simulate what it would be like to live on, really limited amounts of food for long periods of time. You have the Biosphere 2 experiment, which was the 2 years of scientists living in a dome in the desert in Arizona in the US and having a couple hundred calories a day calorie deficit. And the one thing that pops up in all of these different circumstances is that people's brains become consumed with the idea of food. They start reading, cookbooks and magazines that have pictures of food. If they see movies or TV shows, they don't focus on the people, their brain focuses on food. So in this episode of The Hidden Brain, they actually mentioned that Minnesota starvation experiment. But they also mentioned this woman, super hard charging. I think she was a class valedictorian in high school, did great in university, went on to med school. And it was either residency or internship, she had a meltdown. And the meltdown was that her brain, the scarce resource was time. Almost similar to what I mentioned with me, waking up one day and realizing I don't have any time to between what I have to do and all the good things I've decided to do, there was no time. And that created a little bit of a catharsis. And then I believe the last person that they focused on was one that it was poverty was the scarce resource, or money was the scarce resource, right? It was poverty. And what you see in people that are poor, whenever they get any money, they'll often spend it poorly. They'll invest in the now, not in the future, to just get them, their brain, some comfort again. So in all those cases, the underlying theme was when there's things that are important for our survival, our core well-being. So, food, time, money. I would put lots of other things in that we need for basic survival. So like water, romance. When those needs aren't being met, it's almost like a part of our brain takes control to make sure we get those things and consumes the majority of our bandwidth until that need's met. And I think with people that are starting a new business, doing the entrepreneur role, there's usually one or more of those things that aren't fulfilled, right? By virtue, if you have a standard job that someone else is paying you, there's a degree of financial security. It may not be what you want, but that need is at least met enough that it's not consuming most of the bandwidth. When you're starting your own business, you've got that need to meet. You've got to juggle lots of other things. So my assumption is that those people's bandwidths are just hugely consumed most of the time. And when that's the case, sleep becomes harder. And when we don't sleep, then the brain's ability to recharge and make mental energy is limited. So it becomes this almost vicious circle. So I think, to me, it's not necessarily stress management. It's trying to figure out what's consuming the bandwidth the most. And let's start there and see if we can do something to get that need a little bit more met. Because we don't have if you've been dieting and have enough willpower to have stuck to it for a couple months, that hunger is not going away. That part of our brain that wants you to eat and regain weight, there's no hack that's going to make that quiet, right? Until that's satisfied that it either doesn't need that to regain that weight, or it's regained it, it's going to be eat, right? So it's going to be consuming the bandwidth. So the key thing to me is always figuring out what that thing is that we're ruminating a lot about, and then take whatever step we can to solve as much of that as quickly as possible.
Right. Yeah, I guess that was what I meant by stress management, was finding that puzzle piece that's stressing you the most or puts the most stress on the system. And it could definitely be, sleep, that you're not getting enough sleep. It could be your nutrition. It could be that you're just sitting in front of the computer the entire day and you don't get any exercise. So there are lots of puzzle pieces to figure out. And
then I think for things like that, then it's doing things to, as much as possible, create good environments around us. So one of the things I learned from being in the Navy is the Navy created a horrible environment to get people to be healthy because you had sleep deprivation, especially when you were out at sea. You had rotating shift work, which is horrible, stress on the body clock. The quality of the food, at least in the 80s, had a lot to be desired. A lot of things were fried, starchy, like we would recognize these, basically cafeteria food is what you eat nonstop. There was more work than you had time to do. So there was always this like almost need or like strong feeling like I don't have time to do anything else. I don't even have time to do all my work. And so fitting in exercise again when you were out at sea was challenging. So the environment that they put people in was one that was designed to basically burn out and cause people to get, fat and unfit. And on the flip side, one of my part-time jobs in the Navy, since I was fit, was to take those people and try to get them leaner and fitter. And I would you just want to scream. I'm like, well, like the system's broken. It's not the person. So,
right. Yeah, you have.
So I think even for this whole work from home time, one of the things, because I can sit in front of my computer, start working, and hours could go by if I'm, really focused on what I'm doing. So I set a reminder on my phone app or on my computer, but typically on my phone, that I just have set to ring every 30 minutes, which is, I may choose to ignore it, but at least I have to intentionally choose to ignore it. And more often than not, I'll at least get up and quite often during the day, just go out and do a 1 or 2 minute quick walk and come back in. So not that has to be done, but if we don't do intentional things to improve the environment, it's really challenging to do good habits and then consume some of our bandwidth to do those, which we could just shove off onto the app or some other thing if we use that.
Dr. Kelly and I had such a great conversation that the whole interview turned out to be much longer than I intended. We probably could have talked for hours. Anyways, I decided to turn the interview into 2 shorter episodes instead of just one longer one. So you just listen to part 1 of the interview, and next week I'll release the second part. So stay tuned for the next episode when Dr. Kelly and I are going to talk about the daily high performance habits that he recommends, about trusting your intuition and paying attention to your body's signals, as well as about feeding your brain and what to eat, when to eat, and how much to eat in order to stay healthy. So make sure you tune in next week and listen to part 2 of the interview. Take care. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to the Wired for Success podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you did, please take a sec to rate and review my show. It would mean the world to me because you'd help me reach more entrepreneurs like yourself who would love this show. If you'd like to learn more about creating a widely successful business without sacrificing your health, relationships, or sanity, make sure to stick around and subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. And why don't you help me spread the word and share this show with your friends? I'd really appreciate it, and I'm sure your friends will too. Want to continue this conversation, build real relationships, and join a community of like-minded entrepreneurs? Come join my free Facebook community for visionary entrepreneurs. I would love to see you there. In the meantime, if you haven't done so already, grab my free brain priming audio file for entrepreneurs and start priming your brain for success in less than 5 minutes each morning. Curious? You can learn more about how this works and download the audio file at www.wiredforsuccess.solutions. Until next time, bye!